Hey everybody, Dr. Morley. It's time for tip number 2, and if you couldn't tell, I'm in a tank top and the sun is out, so you probably guessed that tip number 2 is supplementing with vitamin D, more specifically vitamin D3. And if you have an issue with calcium deposition within the body, recommend vitamin D3 with K2. That's going to help us appropriately absorb and utilize calcium, so we're not depositing it in tendons, arteries, etc., tissues where they're not supposed to be. Now we got to ask ourselves with this virus, is there any common denominators? And I think that potentially there is. We know that the elderly population is being struck by this virus more than the younger population. We know that the obese individuals are being struck with this more than individuals who are not obese. We know darker complected individuals are being struck by more, and we're seeing high concentrations of this virus in areas where not only we're crowded, but there's high levels of pollution. So what could potentially be a common denominator with all those things? Well, when we have high levels of pollution, the sun doesn't actually penetrate the atmosphere like it should, doesn't strike our skin, we don't get those UVB rays, and then we don't convert vitamin D in the body. When we look at the elderly population, they don't convert vitamin D in the body as efficient as the younger population. We know that darker complected individuals actually require more vitamin D. They're not as efficient at creating it from the sun. And we also know the same to be true with the obese population. So I think that vitamin D could potentially be a common denominator here. We know that vitamin D is incredibly vital for proper immune function. It has an anti-inflammatory role. It also helps produce compounds called defensins that actually help limit viral replication, and that's why we've seen so many studies out there done on vitamin D and different viruses, more specifically influenza-like illnesses. We know that it can potentially help prevent some of those illnesses and prevent some of the secondary complications of those illnesses, most notably being pneumonia. So vitamin D, incredibly important. We normally get it from the sun. We need those UVB rays, so we need to be exposed to the sun, almost fully exposed, tank top, shorts, flip-flops, no sunscreen for a good 20 minutes. After that, you can cover up, put on your sunscreen if you like. Obviously, we don't want you guys to get burned. Normally, this time of year, I don't recommend supplementing with vitamin D, but since we're in the current situation that we're in, I do recommend individuals supplement with vitamin D3 and potentially vitamin D3 with K2. If you're that population I just spoke of at the beginning of this video. I recommend that individuals get their vitamin D, their blood vitamin D levels up to that 60 mark. So you can go to any lab and they should be able to run a vitamin D panel, and usually the reference range is they want you to above 30. We need to be above that 60 mark. The way that we get there, if we're not there, 10,000 IUs a day for 2 weeks, and then titrate that down to 5,000 IUs for potentially a good month, and then titrate it down to 3,000 IUs, and then retest and see if we're above that 60 mark. Vitamin D not only has important immune implications, but it's important for muscle function, bone formation, even insulin sensitivity. So we just want to make sure that we are sufficient in vitamin D. Natural sources include things like organ meats, egg yolks. Most people don't like organ meats, so I recommend that you get your sun and you potentially supplement if we are in that deficient category, if we're not above that 60 mark. Hope you guys enjoyed tip number 2. We will see you tomorrow for tip number 3.